Hello everyone and welcome back to my channel. This is another video where I'm looking at an older camera that is supposed to produce some really pleasing images which tend to have more character, shall we say, than newer film cameras can kind of produce, because there's quite a lot of thought out there that newer kind of more modern cameras are very good at producing a kind of a clean digital modern look to the images, but they've kind of also lost a little bit of character that kind of older cameras used to be able to produce. So again, this is following on the back of watching a Nigel Danson video where a lot of people liked an older camera that he kind of used, his Nikon D200, which is about 15 years old now, probably 16 years, the amount of times I've been banging on about it. But he pitted it against a newer camera of his, and a lot of people in the kind of comments, including myself, actually preferred the way that the old D200 rendered its images, and the colours that it produced were absolutely amazing compared to the more kind of digital look from the Nikon Z7. And don't get me wrong, obviously from a technical point of view and dynamic range point of view, those kind of newer cameras can really deliver on those aspects, but I do feel that sometimes they can look a little bit too kind of clinical and have lost that kind of organic feeling to their kind of images. So in today's video, I'm going to be looking at the Fujifilm X-E1 that I've had now for a couple of months. And this isn't really any kind of in-depth review, but now the fact that I've had a chance to use the camera for a couple of months, I'm just going to offer up my thoughts on its likes and its dislikes, and whether I'll be keeping it. And because I've still got my Fujifilm 100, which I've kind of been hanging on really until I've made this video, because obviously they're a similar age, these two cameras, and because again the X100, which I did a video on, was supposed to have something magic and special about its images, I thought it was only right that I kind of compare the two images. And I've already done a video actually where I did do a bit more of an in-depth kind of comparison on the actual image quality of the two cameras, and I actually felt that the files that the X-E1 produced were a lot better and more natural looking than the ones from the X100. Hence why I'll be selling this camera and keeping hold of the X-E1 probably for a little bit longer. So probably a lot of you are asking actually, or those that are watching this anyway, is why did I opt for the X-E1 rather than perhaps the more highly regarded X-Pro1? Yeah, so one reason is that the image quality for the X-E1 and the X-Pro1 are supposed to be very, very similar because they use the same original X-Trans sensor and also the same kind of processor. In addition, the X-E1 is obviously a lot more kind of compact and lighter than the X-Pro1, although the disadvantage with that is you do lose a couple of features in the X-E1. For instance, there's no optical viewfinder in this camera, it's just an electronic viewfinder, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail a bit later on. One thing I will touch on just now though is that this camera over the X-Pro1 has a diopter built into its EVF, so that means that you can obviously use it for people like me who wear glasses. You can tune in your prescription and then be able to use the camera without your glasses, and this is something which definitely trumps the X100, because even though the X100 has the OVF and the EVF and it also has a diopter, it only really allows you to tune in really kind of weak prescriptions compared to the one I found on the X-E1, which allows me to use this camera basically without my glasses, which is great. Another thing why I went for this one rather than the X-Pro1 as well is basically cost. You know, this one you can pick up the bodies for about 100 quid, like I paid about 125 for this one, but it did come with some warranty. And then I bought the cheap 15 to 45 kind of lens as well, and again that only cost me about £120 here in the UK. So both together it's cost me about £240, which is quite comparable to about the $220 I paid for the X100 originally. So again, it gives you an idea of what you can obviously afford if you've got like a set budget of around that. And in comparison, I think the X-Pro1 bodies alone are going for about £200–250 here in the UK. So obviously that's double what the X-E1 bodies are capable for practically the same kind of functionality. So anyway, on to my specific likes and dislikes and just general kind of comments about the X-E1. So I just thought I'd do the video this way for this one, just to see whether this one works better rather than you seeing my ugly mug. I thought I'd actually focus on the cameras I'm going to be talking about. So obviously the Fujifilm X100 I think just looks a better, almost sexier looking camera, but they are pretty much identical in terms of the size and weight, as long as you don't go sticking too long a lens on the X-E1. But the 15–45 is pretty compact. That's with it off. When you turn it on, it does come out a little bit, but it's still pretty compact. But obviously it's going to be a lot less compact than the fixed lens on the X100. The X100 also does feel nicer to hold in the hand, but that's partly because of this kind of third-party grip that kind of came with it. You know, it kind of does feel that you kind of need to rest your finger in that kind of point on the camera itself, whereas obviously my Fuji X-E1 didn't come with that. But I do find that up here you can kind of rest your hand, but the danger is this exposure compensation dial here is very easy to knock, so that's something to be mindful of before you kind of take your composition. Whereas obviously on the X100 with this grip, it almost blocks access to the exposure compensation dial, which you can still use, but I find that I don't probably knock it by accident quite as much compared to the X-E1. One thing both these cameras are pretty good at is I feel that I can operate them both one-handed. You know, the on-off switch is on the right-hand side, which is a departure from my normal Olympus cameras, where you need to turn them on the left-hand side, and then obviously all your controls and operations can be done with your thumb. So yeah, I do find it's a pretty good one-handed operation, and same with the Fujifilm as well. It's probably not as easy to hold, but I think at the moment, with this kind of larger lens, it does make the handling a little bit more of a challenge. And something I'll consider if I keep this camera is whether I do want to get a kind of an extra kind of grip, just to improve the kind of handling aspect a little bit more. I do really miss the lack of the OVF on these cameras. The one obviously in the X100 was just brilliant to use in kind of challenging light conditions, whereas obviously you're limited to just using the EVF on the X-E1. But it's a good job actually that the X-E1, its EVF is an absolute joy. Other than it being a bit small, it is a very clear and very colourful and a very good resolution to help you compose your images. And as I talked about earlier, it's got a great diopter on the side, which allows you to tune in quite strong kind of prescriptions. Another thing I really miss in terms of the design aspects on the X-E1 is the fact that the Fujifilm's got a leaf shutter, so you can fire it off. Just focus on something and take a picture. It's near silent. Whereas if I do the same on the X-E1, might have to move the subject back a little bit. It's a more definite click for sure, but not horrendous, and but obviously a lot louder than the X100's leaf shutter. So for that reason, the X100 is great for street photography. I think the X100 is still very good. I'd probably look at putting a prime lens on the actual front of the body just to make it a little bit kind of easier to use. One thing to note as well is the X-E1 doesn't have, because it hasn't got a leaf shutter, it's got a more conventional shutter which can go in faster speeds. It hasn't got the kind of the ND filter that the X100 had. Yeah, so even though the size of the EVFs look fairly similar on these two cameras, I think it must be to do with the eye point, in that if you do wear glasses and you put them up to the viewfinder, you can see more of the EVF on the X100 compared to the X-E1. But like I said, because it's got a great diopter, you don't have to use your glasses so much when you're operating this camera, so that's a really good feature for the X-E1. Like the X100 though, and because it's quite an old camera now, this one was released in 2012, there is still a little bit of a lag on the EVF, especially if you're going into bright or dark conditions, but it's nothing that I've really kind of found to be that problematic, but it is something that you need to be aware of. So in terms of the handling, I've already kind of touched on this a little bit as well, but I absolutely really loved the X100. It definitely had a kind of fun fact to it that made you want to just pick it up and use it. I just don't feel the same kind of attachment with the X-E1 at the moment, but I will endeavour to try and get that kind of feeling about using this camera now that I'm kind of using it a little bit more, and especially because the character of the images it produces are a lot better, I feel. Like I said in the previous video, it's a real shame that you can't get the original X-Trans sensor and its processor combination in the X100. This one, the original X100, is a Bayer sensor, and then its next iteration, the 100S, jumps to the X-Trans 2 sensor, which produces a very different look to the images compared with the original X-Trans 1 sensor in the X-E1 and the X-Pro1. Right, so another good like actually with the X-E1 is that I think it definitely benefits from being a couple of years newer than the X100 in terms of its operation speed. So you can definitely change settings a lot quicker, the shot-to-shot time is quicker, the autofocus is definitely a lot quicker, and yeah, it's just faster in operation and use than the X100. And certainly the worst thing for the X100 was when it was writing files and you wanted to kind of change to another film simulation. You had to wait until the light on the back of the camera stopped flashing before you could do anything, where it's a lot quicker on the X-E1. So yeah, I really like the fixed lens nature of the X100. You know, it really kind of allows you to be a bit more kind of creative, but you do kind of lose that versatility of being able to put any kind of lens on the X-E1, whether that be the native Fuji lenses, or like I talked about earlier, you can get an adapter and then put on your own legacy lenses as well, and that kind of gives a really different kind of feel and character to the images that you kind of can produce with that combination. So yeah, it's a real treat to use those kind of lenses and other lenses. It kind of increases its versatility, and of course you can adapt then the camera to kind of any environment that you want to kind of shoot. It's not weather sealed, so obviously you've got to be mindful of that. Even though like a lens might be waterproof, the body's got to be waterproof as well. So in this instance, neither this lens or the body are waterproof. But then saying that, the X100 wasn't waterproof either. Another good thing with this camera as well is when you've got the legacy lens fitted to the camera, there's a great kind of magnification assist function, which allows you to kind of achieve critical focus, obviously on these manual focus lenses, very quickly. One thing to note when you do put a legacy lens on, as well as changing the setting in the camera, telling it that you're kind of shooting without a lens, is to change the camera to M here, manual focus, and then that way you have the option to switch the magnification on your kind of live view, so you can then manually focus and achieve critical focus a lot quicker. I find that really good, that function. This lens is really cheap though. I'm not sure whether I'm gonna keep it, for the reasons explained in my last video, where it just doesn't tell you what focal length you are. So you kind of zoom in and it changes obviously the focal length for the camera, but it doesn't actually tell you what your actual focal length is. So that made it really difficult to compare it to the 23mm of the X100. Another good thing with the interchangeable lenses as well with the X-E1 is obviously you can buy lenses which have got in-body stabilization, like this 15-45 lens, just to help you out in kind of lower light situations, whereas obviously the X100 hasn't got any kind of stabilization. So another thing I like about this camera, and it was the same that on the X100, is that I really like the auto ISO minimum shutter kind of setting. I really wish my Olympus EM1 had this function, the ability to set like a maximum ISO that you want the camera to go up to, and then a minimum shutter speed that you don't want the camera to go below, and then the camera will kind of adjust what setting ISO combination to use depending on the composition and the available kind of light. Another thing on the X100 as well, which is similar again to the X-E1, obviously depending on the lens, is that this had about a 10cm minimum focus distance, whereas this particular lens that I've got here has a minimum focal distance length of about 13 to 15 centimeters, depending on what kind of focal length you've kind of dialed into the lens. Obviously when you use legacy lenses, God knows, I think the minimum focus distance for this one's about 0.5 meter, so obviously that's something to be mindful of when you're selecting what lens to use for your kind of compositions. Right, so I'm not going to talk too much about image quality. I did a previous video where obviously I kind of compared the X-E1 images with the X100 images, and obviously in summary the X-E1 I felt produced better kind of out of camera JPEGs. Where I did struggle with this camera is I couldn't really get the raw files, no matter what software I tried, anywhere close to those kind of JPEGs, which was a little bit frustrating. But the JPEGs certainly have a great kind of feel to them, great colors, and just something about them, you know, just something like I was trying to find in these kind of older kind of cameras. It also compared well to my Olympus EM1, but probably not enough at this stage to justify replacing my Olympus system, especially because I've got some quite expensive lenses for the Olympus system. But I can definitely see this camera complementing my Olympus system, especially if I kind of fit a more fixed prime lens to the camera, and then just use this more as a kind of a street shooter. And the good thing as well with this camera though is that even though I haven't been able to find software that makes the raw files look good, you can actually use the camera's ability to edit its own raw files and change the kind of the shadow and the highlights, the color, the noise reduction and the sharpening and the color space, and yeah, just loads. So you can really kind of change the feel of your images directly in camera without having to use any software. So one good thing with this camera though, being an X-Trans sensor, is that if you get a program called EXIF tool, you can alter the EXIF data on the raw files that this camera produces and almost trick the Capture One kind of software into thinking it's the latest Fujifilm camera, and then you can apply any of the Fujifilm simulations that they've released to the raw file. So the ability to do this might then help edit the raw file, which I've kind of struggled with so far. yeah, so I'm definitely going to keep this camera for a little bit longer. I'm probably going to do some more videos where I compare it to my EM1 again, just to see whether the difference is enough to warrant having two kind of similar cameras in my kind of collection. And as I said in the last video, I'm reluctantly going to sell the X100 because although I do find this a much more fun camera to kind of use, unfortunately now I've seen the kind of the images that the X-E1 produces, it's very difficult for me to kind of want to use the X100 because I know I can produce better images with the X-E1. So there we go, that's my kind of initial thoughts on the X-E1. And if you've got any comments, then feel free to put them in the box below. So thanks for watching, bye for now.